Cool.fm is the perfect station for music lovers who enjoy a mix of adult pop, modern country, and classic hits. Our unique blend of different genres creates an awesome listening experience that you won't find anywhere else. With Cool.fm, you don't have to constantly change stations to hear the music you love. Just download the Live 365 app and start listening to our curated selection of modern adult and country hits, as well as the classics you know and love. So tune in to Cool.fm and start enjoying the best of all your favorite music in one place.
Hi, I'm Tommy Kulik. I'm the creator and writer of Oswald and the Star Chaser. You can find it on scoutcomics.com or at your local comic store. Find me on Twitter at ETK Comics. And you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Hey, I'm Villano Maron. I'm co-creator, co-writer, and letterer of Oswald and the Star Chaser. You can also find us on thestarlands.com, kind of follow all our projects. And you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today on this interview with two very talented co-creators of an amazing comic, Oswald and the Star Chaser, which is a great name, by the way. We're joined today by Tommy Kulik and Tyler Villano Maron. How are you both doing today?
We're great. Thanks for having us on.
Doing good.
For those that don't know anything about yourselves as creative people, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking.
I'm Tommy Kulik. I'm the writer for Oswald and the Star Chaser. Been writing off and on different little projects. I wrote a little webcomic set in the same universe maybe a year or two ago. So I've always really liked the medium, and this is just me trying to get into it. I've got a lot of stories I want to tell. Got like a goofy style. I think that shows in Oswald and the Star Chaser. It's more of a space fantasy adventure comic. A lot of silliness, a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I'm Tyler Villano Maron. I'm a career graphic designer, kind of turned comic book writer and letterer. I collaborate very closely with Tommy Kulik, my best friend. He really comes big from the whole comic book world. For like 10 years, I was like really into like the indie scene and music. So put together, Star Chaser is a really awesome collaboration from kind of both our spheres of cultural influence.
What is the most misunderstood aspect about the sci-fi genre?
That's a tough one, because if you ask a lot of different people what sci-fi is, they'll give you different answers. I think for me, modern sci-fi, a lot of people are taking it as in more like Star Wars, which I don't think is a hard sci-fi. Not to say anything wrong with Star Wars. I love Star Wars. It's probably one of my favorite things around. But I feel like people have kind of gotten away from what sci-fi is. I wouldn't call although the Star Chaser sci-fi. That's why I always kind of say space fantasy.
In regards to the comic itself here, from what I've seen, it's beautifully drawn. You have great character interactions. I love the style of the different aliens. You know, I think the epitome of great space fantasy and space operas are the aliens, because humans are a dime a dozen. But if you can draw and have really cool interacting with aliens in your worlds, I think that's the epitome of an amazing space fantasy. So talk about some of the cultures when you were working on creating the world of Oswald and the Star Chaser.
So we've got a really talented artist, Tom Hoskisson, and a lot of the aliens that you see in issue 1, a lot of those were freestyled by him. And then a lot of them he'll be like, oh, I came up with this goofy little dude. And then sometimes he would be like, here's what I think he would be like. Here's some cool guys I wrote. And it's like, oh, yeah, we can work back from there. That's pretty neat. And then in some of the later issues, I'll just throw in like a little description of what the alien will look like, something really vague. And then he always knocks it out of the park. So he's got a very creative mind. So a lot of it's not like, oh, we have a bunch of different specific species of aliens mapped out. A lot of it's just like, oh, draw someone who's got like a walnut face, or someone who looks kind of like an angry dog, and then see what we can come up with.
Yeah, there's like two sides of it, you know. But when we want to get really specific, Tom Hoskinson, the artist, can also kind of knock that out of the park. In issue 2 and 3, when Oswald and the Star Chaser, they get to kind of their next destination, which is this rotating mechanical metropolis called Axis 3F. And there's an integral character called Deville Laviche. And this is more of a humanoid one. You know, she plays an integral role in kind of getting them through Axis, which is a very seedy planet. And I believe in the script, I'm like, you know, she's a very strong drawer, kind of like Grace Jones, the singer. And, you know, he gave us a few options and it was just perfect. Excited for people to see it.
When building world, like you just mentioned, planet names, you're trying to flesh out a small section, what's in your mind. From a collaborative effort and co-creators and co-writers that you both are here, who came up with some of the funnier names that you couldn't use in the book, or who came up with some really weird planets that maybe we haven't seen yet, but we'll see on like a star chart or something?
So there's a few names that did not make it in. I know the two names that have not made it in. The big crab guy that you can see in the bottom right, his name's Scuttler Crabano. And we just couldn't fit the name in the script. That's still his name. It's just there's no point where it's like, oh, that's Scuttler Crabano. So probably my favorite name. There is a character later on who's a very, very big guy. In the script, I wrote his name as, it was basically Brick Shithouse, but with like an apostrophe over the I. So it's kind of like a fantasy-ish.
Yeah.
And then I think Tom, the artist, is like, can we put this in a book that's for all audiences? And I was like, I guess not.
So his name turned into like Brick Shows or something. Yeah. I think creating names for both characters and planets, like that's my favorite part. I did a lot of that. One of my favorite ones to tell is a character who appears later in the series, but in issue 2 is mentioned by name. Called he's like this peace fanatic robot called Saint Orson. Came about was, I was doing my Tommy and I, we're like this really close. We just message on Discord and over at Star Chaser, it was like daily thinking of ideas and stuff. And we were planning a meeting, and I was like, and then Tommy's like, does this Saturday or Sunday work for you? He said, does Sat or Sun work for you? And he forgot to add spaces, and I was like, does Sat or Sun? I'm like, that looks like a character name. Tell me about him. And he's like, what? I'm like, who is Sat Orson? And then, sometimes I'll just kind of, we'll prompt each other, and that will become like a character name.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, a lot of our character names came from me sending a typo and then Tyler saying, oh, who's this character?
Let's just capitalize on it. I love improv, just improving names. Not everything has to have a ton of thought and lore behind it. And I think it's a healthy mix if you have some of both, which we do.
I'm always curious about this. When you're designing your characters, how in-depth do you get into, besides the main characters, how in-depth do you get into like the character sheet of, say, your side characters or your supporting characters to really flesh out these stories that you're creating?
Yeah, it depends on the character. I know for the side characters, sometimes I'll just throw in like quick blurb about them or like a short little thing about their history and then just let Tom have at it. I know for the characters who are like the antagonists or the central role, Tom is pretty good about giving us like a huge sheet of different ideas he has on what they look like. And that's always really helpful. And then for characters like Oswald and Star Chaser, we spent a lot of time like iterating on that much more in depth.
I always find collaboration with multiple people, whether you're both writers or both artists, or you have a writer and artist team together, working together and to really realize a vision of what you're creating here. Tommy, what does Tyler bring from a creative perspective that balances you out? And Tyler, what does Tommy bring in your collaboration that balances you out?
So I know I get really in the weeds a lot there's been a lot of stories that I've written for Oswald and Star Chaser that have ultimately not made it because I get way hung up on like on one specific thing and it gets really convoluted, and Tyler's really good at cutting that down and be like, hey, this is kind of ridiculous or this is a little silly. We're on the same wavelength a lot of times. So when I'm stuck on something, I can be like, hey, I'm kind of stuck on here, and then he'll throw some ideas at me like, oh, those are really good ideas. Why didn't I think of this? So it helps that we're on the same wavelength, but then he's operating at like on a different track. So when I'm getting too hung up on something or too far down a dead end, he can be like, hey, we got to figure out what we're doing, rearrange. And then the actual collaboration process, he does the co-writing. And so I'll summarize it. I'll do a rough outline, and then he'll come out, go over it and see what works, what doesn't. And then I'll take that, turn to a script, and then he'll do a secondary pass through. And then only at the end step, when he's lettering, he'll do a lot of the dialogue. He'll touch it up or fix it up, so it's a lot of iteration that he helps bring, and that helps like tune everything up so it comes out as perfectly as it can.
I was actually going to say that Tommy's the one who grounds me. And then he just said that I ground him. So the way we're writing this specific comic book, I think it's a comic book. Yeah, so the way that we're co-writing this specific comic book is that Tommy's like the lead writing scripting role, and I'm very much co-writing. Even for the very beats, it's like this, it's always a collaboration, but they really always come from him first, and I appreciate that. Like I'll come in with ideas and like concepts, but he's always got like the foundation pretty much.
Challenges are always interesting when it comes to the collaborative process as well too. So then what challenges did you both overcome where you're really stuck in your respective corners trying to solve an issue?
The space train. Later in the comic, we got a space train. Every so often, Tyler would be like, I don't get the space train. What's with the space train? I was like, I want a space train. So we every now and then we argue about this story beat that'll happen later in the comic when they go on the space train.
Listen, I thought that the space train should take Oswald and Star Chaser from one one planet to another, but it actually just goes around a planet.
Not getting into spoilers.
The space train isn't even relevant to. No. I've already given on the space train. I'm okay with. I like the space train. I didn't used to, but I've warmed up to the space train. We really don't butt heads at all. We're both big shit posters. We just vibe.
Yeah, we don't usually have conflicts like that. Generally, if one of us has an idea and the other disagrees, it's generally like, okay, I can see the problem with it now. It's never like, I want this. No, you shouldn't. And then we just fight it. And then a lot of times if he suggests something I disagree with it, or I suggest something he disagrees with it, we usually find a pretty good middle ground. We can work it out.
But that's good. I mean, the fact that you're both best friends, you've already know each other's like foils that make you both work well together. I don't think you would put together a series if you didn't obviously like working together. So that works out well for you both.
Yeah, we both know how to pitch and write for each other. We know what each other likes.
What was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
I've always been a big reading guy. I always loved to read. In elementary school, I was always reading something. Just throughout school, I was always reading something. I think a lot of how I write is kind of reflected in some of the books that I really enjoy reading and some of the comics I really enjoy reading. I always kind of like the more, not absurd, but more goofy kind of stuff. So I think I always wanted to tell a kind of story where maybe you don't crack out loud, but you smile a lot. So I think that's always just been kind of me, just reading books that make you feel something.
My answer will be more grammatical in that from the script to kind of the end lettering stage, it can look great on the script, but once it gets, onto my Adobe Illustrator and I'm like touching up the final dialogue over the 6 issues of the first volume, I found that you can say a lot more with less words, and that you can have all this all through the page, all these words, but sometimes like a really well thought out sentence or two can say more than like a paragraph or an info dump out of the character's mouth.
Everyone usually asks, what's the most wisest piece of advice or what's the most bullshit piece of advice you've ever received? But what is the second wisest piece of advice that you both have received that has stuck with you in your career?
I think the second wisest was what I got from our editor, Colleen Douglas. I'll give her a shout out. She's been really helpful. She's given a lot of good tips, and I would try and pick the one I like the most from her, but probably keeping speech bubbles to 20 words. It sounds like not a big thing, but like when you're writing a script, it helps the dialogue because you'll look at what you've written and it's like, oh, this is so not clicking here. And then you count it up as, oh, this is like 50 words. And then once you start thinking of more concise language, and I always try to make my dialogue snappy. That's what I really I pride myself on is everything everyone says in the comic. It's got like a good flow to it, I think. And then it really helps just thinking, okay, 20 words maximum.
That's good, actually. It'd be good for film scripts as well, too. If some people wouldn't do an info dump during a monologue.
Yeah, and then I saw someone commented about comics in general. I was like, you ever open up a comic book page and you just see a ton of speech bubbles all over. But even before you start reading, it's like, oh, this is exhausting. And you just feel tired. I try to avoid that.
If I wanted words to cover a page, I'd just pick up a novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly what mine is. It's something that the Scout editorial director, Andrea Lorenzo Molinari, who's been really great communicating with us, what he told me was that launching your any comic book series, but especially our debut, and he basically said that the launch improves your whole volume. And what Andrea told me is that, because I think I was really focused on the release date and, getting the first week perfect. And he said that it's a marathon, not a sprint. You got to keep that hype up, not focus too much on that day your comic comes out, because ours actually was delayed a couple times because of the Scout printer in Florida and the hurricane which happened. So that's kind of helped me stay grounded. It kind of helped me keep my sanity and stay grounded. Don't focus on that one day or the first week. Being consistent, inevitably have to do some self-promotion.
I was going to ask about Scout Comic. Had a lot of creators on the show from that particular publisher. What does Scout Comics allowed you to do, or focus on, I should say, from a creator perspective, now that they're publishing this amazing series?
So they really helped us just kind of focus on making the comic. When we were pitching it to publishers, we only had one issue and then a rough outline of the rest. And then once it was cleared, it was like, all right, let's get to the races. And then Colleen was there to really help give input on stuff as I was writing it. And that helped really shape things to make it more clear cut and more perfect as we were going.
Yeah, I think it was great that Scout was willing to take a chance on us, for sure, because for Tommy and I, this is our kind of published comic book world debut. We haven't really self-published anything or been previously published on a publisher, and I keep saying published a lot. They took a chance, and we really appreciate that.
Is there a comic that made you feel the way you hoped readers of your work will feel after reading it?
I've got a comic and a TV show. So I say the comic, probably Invincible. And everyone heard about that from the show. Was a big fan of that when it was coming out like 10 or 15 years ago. I think that was what really got me into the indie scene. And I know people are going to think, well, it's kind of a tonal disconnect, but there's a lot of fun moments of Invincible when it's not, just people punching holes in other people. Between that, there's a lot of goofy moments where it's just, having fun with comic books. And then a show is Venture Brothers.
Oh, yeah.
Huge fan of that show. A lot of my humor kind of comes from the Venture Brothers, not necessarily all the 80s stuff, but just like the kind of absurd and everything just being a little weird and then just kind of playing that straight.
What do you think of the special they just released?
I didn't know there was one. I didn't know they were making the movie.
I think they did like a holiday special first to kind of test the waters to see.
I totally missed that. But I got their art book. Nice. I've been working through that. It's really good. I'm getting ready to rewatch it for the 100th time.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a comic book because I have a video game, but I don't have a comic book. I have a comic book in there somewhere. Yeah, so Tommy mentioned a comic book and a TV series, an animated show. And I'll mention a video game, actually. One of my all-time favorites is Paper Mario, Nintendo 64. The ones that came after were good, too. Just it has such a...
What did you enjoy about the game that made you want to write a comic roughly for it?
Tommy mentioned, Venture Bros and Invincible, and I'm going to come in with a video game, which was Paper Mario on the Nintendo 64. So we're going back like 2 decades here, and it's one of my favorite games of all time. It not only has a very well executed story and plot, which is very seamless, but kind of humor is ingrained through the characters and what happens to them every single chapter. And the game offers a really well-rounded experience between the plot, story, characters, and humor that over the whole series of Star Chaser, I would love us to be able to deliver. Like, it's a very high standard, a very high quality.
Everyone has one person that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
Tommy, you thinking about this? I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I would say I've got a lot of different inspirations, but I don't want to give you a mile-long list. I would say Stephen Bruce. He's a fantasy writer. I found his series when I was a kid at some used bookstore. Probably way too young to read it. It was kind of a very unique series, and all his books are really unique. And I think a lot of how I view fantasy and how I'm treating that with space fantasy and also the Star Chaser kind of comes from his ability to just kind of do whatever he wants and make it work. Maybe him, and then just, he's been at it for so long and kind of in his own sphere. And I was like, yeah, I guess that would be him. Whereas you can kind of just do your own story and make it a little bit weird, make it your own thing, and you'll find that success.
I have 2 answers, one for me and one for the both of us. And I think Tommy knows who that's going to be. But my answer is actually a musician, very accomplished indie musician by this point, named Sufjan Stevens. And he's put out an eclectic stream of albums over couple of decades, and what stands out about them is that his music is very thematic. I think his most well-known album is called Illinois, put out in 2005 on the label Asthmatic Kitty. And from album to album, he always keeps, one, a very high standard of quality and he puts a lot of research into the production, the themes. That every album is a very full and complete experience. He's put so much thought into kind of every song, the themes, and he blends humor, which again is really a constant kind of our creative process, but also like kind of human emotion. And I think every album hits. He hasn't put out things one would consider subpar. I think that's inspired kind of me as well. For Tommy and I was expecting him to say Grant Morrison because I think that is something that in the beginning, it was the first big common ground. I think Tommy was introducing me to some Grant Morrison stuff, and we just both adore, respect, and just follow his work. And as a creator, what's your favorite Grant Morrison, Tommy?
That is a tough one. I'd say it depends on my mood, but usually Pax Americana, I think, is the one I revisit the most.
That was on he did the Multiversity, right?
Yes, I was part of Multiversity. It was his take on the Charlton characters that inspired Watchmen.
Yeah, you had introduced me to that very early on because we started really getting into comics and collaborating in 2015 or 16, and we met in 2014 over an MMO. And I read that, I enjoyed it. I think mine would be Doom Patrol, and I believe that you can see a lot of that surface in my writing and what I add to our process.
From a professional standpoint, you have both created an amazing series so far, and I can't wait to see more of what you create in the future. Obviously, this isn't your only co-creation. I can't wait to see what you come up with next, and please feel free both to come back on the show, and we'll talk about that as well, too. So, and the fact that Scout Comics has picked you up is also an amazing accomplishment in itself. So you're professionally successful in that regard. Do you consider yourselves personally successful?
I would say, I guess, kind of waiting until it hits the shelves. We've got the comp issues from Scout, and I haven't opened those yet. Waiting until it's the shelf before I say, "Oh, I'm a comic creator now." It's just that's the moment when it's it's finally happened.
Open your comps. Oh my God, it is beautiful. Star Chaser #1 is beautiful. You have to open open your goddamn comps, Tommy. Yeah,
I'll read through it when I buy #1. No, I got comps, but I want to go to the store and see it on the shelf, and maybe I'll buy it.
Are you both gonna go into your local comic book stores and sign it, and just put it back on the shelf?
The store I play cards at, I play Flesh and Blood on Fridays. They're selling a few, and they say, "Oh yeah, you could sign them on Fridays when you come down to play cards."
Yeah, I believe both of us, but yeah, I think I'm answering for Tommy. I'll answer for myself. Tommy already answered. I would say I am. It's a good, like you said, it's a very introspective question. Yeah, I believe that both of us, we've achieved the first milestone in a long trajectory of milestones for being, I guess, personally successful, I guess, as comic creators, because getting your comic on the shelf or on the digital shelf through a publisher is not an easy task. But I think once you've kind of been in it for so long, like Star Chaser, we got signed onto Scout 2 years ago. So I personally am taking it for granted, and it doesn't seem like a big deal anymore, but it is a huge, I think we shouldn't downplay kind of Star Chaser coming out on the long term. We have lots of series, IPs that the two of us, we call ourselves, TNT. There's Tommy and Tyler. He's got the top billing that we want to get out into the comic sphere, as it were.
You got to celebrate the small wins, A lot of us don't take the time to, we're focused on goals, and that's good, but we never realize what we've actually accomplished until we literally accomplish it. And then we think back on being published. Scout Comics, they've taken a chance, and you both are delivering an amazing comic. So congratulations. That's an amazing win. The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
For me, I think I try to just keep working. I know we pitched Oswald and Star Chaser to a few places before. Anytime we got rejection letter, it was try not to take it oh, this is the end of the world. I don't want to not give up or whatever. I don't know if it's working on a story where it kind of gets into a dead end. I know some of the stuff we were working on before, I would write something, and then it would just be completely terrible, and then try to be like, hey, this makes no sense or this doesn't work at all. And if I'm stuck in a dead end or something doesn't work, I'll try and approach it from a different direction, or work on something else, work through it.
What you got to at the end there was mine. So I worked through it. I don't allow a lot to manifest themselves as failure. I think most of what we experienced, like the rejections at first, like Image didn't pick us up, but I don't see it as a failure. I see it as a setback. This marathon that we're riding through and running. Don't get hung up on failure. Don't allow things to present themselves as failures, because they're just bumps in the road, minor setbacks.
One of the guests I had on recently said something along the lines of, I don't fail, I just look at it from a different angle and move on. The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way, whether it's a comic writer or a creative person in some way, shape, or form. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
Wow, they're looking at our stuff and being inspired. That's that's a lot of pressure. you don't even think about that.
I think the best way to kind of inspire someone would be like, find your own voice. Everyone's got their own way of doing things and their own way of telling a story. You're just finding that voice and letting it show in your work. I mean, if you look at some of the videos people make now, it's all really creative, like the younger stuff from TikTok and stuff. So you just find your voice and finding a way to show who you are. I think that's like the easiest way to really inspire whoever comes after you.
I guess something that I put into my work that I hope the next generation of artists and writers can influence the next one is writing with sincerity and not writing for your peers. I think that those are two big things. Like, people can get really hung up on trying to appease the current zeitgeist and being too focused on what their peers are doing. I'm a big proponent of the new sincerity literature movement. That it kind of really started in the 90s with David Foster Wallace. I guess I'm kind of two generations of a writer after him, because that was like 2 decades, and we're just getting into our careers. But being kind of unabashedly sincere in your work.
Sorry, what's the new sincerity movement? Just so I have some clarification. Because it sounds familiar, but I can't picture it.
There's a literary movement that started in the 90s, and kind of a group of writers answer to everything being very ironic, just a whole combination of ironic and sincere, sarcastic, everything was kind of becoming a deconstruction. I guess to a point with creatives being kind of insincere and kind of always having to have that edge. Like Star Chaser is very sincere to the point where someone might find it to be, a little cheesy or something, but it's from the heart. That
was really good. I really like that. So if your life was a comic book or TV series or a film, what would its title be? And what would its soundtrack be?
Yes, it would be every comic idea I've got. It's, two characters riffing on each other. Oswald and Star Chaser, that duo, super powerful. So it's a comic about my life would just be, TNT. It's about both of us making comics, I guess. And then soundtrack, every episode, every issue, different one. It started out Neon Indian, because that was kind of what we listened to a lot for the initial stuff of Star Chaser. But yeah, then whatever music that I'm into after that, I'm always listening to something different. Well, I've been in a U2 mood lately.
Nice.
It was big into that when I was a kid. That Vegas ad they put out, pretty gnarly. So I've kind of gone back to my roots.
And I think Tyler, as a musician yourself, this should be really easy, right?
Oh, I guess you might have to edit the beginning, because I'm not actually a musician, but I like a lot of people come into comic books from kind of the comic book world, scene, and being big followers of comic books. But when I was in college, I was very closely following indie music and attending lots of shows and stuff. So that's kind of what I meant. Okay, so if my life was soundtracked, I think it would be early Animal Collective, where they were a little more chaotic and out there, from their 2005 album Feels. I think if someone wants to get to know me, they can just listen to that. And I think, and I'm actually going to steal the title from the last song on here. It's called Turn Into Something. I guess I never knew what I really wanted to be, actually, especially in my early 20s. I wanted to be like a picture book artist, like a picture book writer and artist, like for kids books. And then like I also wanted to be like an indie musician, like in college. And then I I pursued, just graphic design and now comic book writing and some lettering. So it's like turning into something like just like becoming that version of me that has had a lot like preceding it. And I think that's cool advice for anyone listening, that you don't know what you want to be at first. And then if you just pursue everything that you like, just like try everything, and like you will kind of fall into something that clicks.
Well, I do hate to say it, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you both so much for coming on the show.
Oh, well, we want to thank you for having us and giving us a chance, just like Scott Comics did, because we're new on the scene, and we want to start collaborating with everyone. What do you think, Tommy?
Can I give a quick shout out to the colorist Simon Robbins? He did the colors for #1. He's in Australia, just like Tom. I think they live in different parts of Australia, but he's a great colorist. And then unfortunately he moved on to different projects, but we have Rebecca Good for issues 2 to 6 and hopefully the rest of them. And she's as good as Simon. They're both amazing colorists. They breathe a lot of life into Tom's art. It's already got a lot of life to it.
Yeah, shout out to the whole team and our editor, Colleen Douglas, Andre, who's been great for us. Yeah, and we're just so excited for people to finally get to read Star Chaser, which is out like for real on March 8th, and just following us if you think we're like cool or something. Before
I let you both go, where can we find you? Where can we support you? Of course, how can we find this amazing comic online, and any social medias you both want to promote?
Yeah, I think below here it says @StarChaserComic on Twitter. Insta is starchaser.comic. We also have the starlands.com, which kind of has everything. I'm at August Marches.
I'm on Twitter at ETK Comics. I don't use it much, but I'm there. Everyone keeps saying I gotta tweet more. So I'll get my thoughts on Oswald and comics.
Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find this interview and 1,000+ others on our website, tgtmedia.com or twogeekstalking.com. That's the word 2, not the number 2. Of course, our YouTube channel is a lot more updated than our website, because I'm only one person. youtube.com/c/tgtmedia. The podcast is back on twogeekstalking.podbean.com, but you can find it on any of your audio streaming services. Just search for Two Geeks Talking. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.